The moment Aaliyah Jackson stepped into the hushed grandeur of the Peter J. Sharp Theater, her pulse thundered in her ears. The vaulted ceiling soared above her, its crystal white beams sweeping inward to form a perfect acoustic dome. A single overhead spotlight traced a circle of light on the polished maple floor, centering on a lone music stand and the glossy black Steinway against the upstage wall. Around her, dozens of other hopefuls, each clutching their instrument cases like talismans, whispered last-minute prayers. Aaliyah's hands fluttered at her sides as she took her place, the weight of her violin case astonishingly light, after all the years spent hunched over practice rosin and metronome. She closed her eyes, inhaled, and recalled the cramped Harlem apartment where her mother first taught her to draw a bow through the smallest creak of a borrowed Suzuki violin. Every cramped hour of scales, every cut finger from looping slippery strings, each tear shed over an elusive, perfect tone, all of it had led to this singular chance, the Juilliard audition. When her name echoed through the silent house, she stepped forward. The piano chamber beyond the proscenium arch awaited her, where a kindly accompanist, a seasoned pianist with silver hair and patient eyes, greeted her with a gentle nod. Aaliyah set her violin on her shoulder, fingertips finding the first position with intuitive certainty. She paused for a heartbeat, then raised her bow. As the pianist's opening chord of Sarasate's Zigeunerweisen reverberated, Aaliyah's nerves melted into focus. The frenetic gypsy dancer theme surged forth under her control. A whisper of reedy low notes, then a flourish of ricochet arpeggios. Her left hand spun across the fingerboard in a deft, dancer-like pirouette, while her right arm coaxed each note into warm resonance. She painted the melody's longing with vibrato that pulsed like a human heartbeat, then unleashed a cascade of double stops, so clean and precise they shimmered in the hush. Every nuanced rubato, every perfectly scaled pianissimo and thunderous fortissimo spoke of uncounted nights spent chasing not just technical mastery, but emotional truth. When the final trailing cadence faded into silence, the seconds stretched taut, an eternity held in the judge's stillness. Then, as one, the panel of five rose to their feet. Dr. Vincent Harris, the chair of strings and a man celebrated for his exacting standards, closed his scorebook and offered Aaliyah a smile that melted her remaining trepidation. The other panelists, white soloists with international careers, murmured words like phenomenal, soulful, irreplaceable. Aaliyah's legs turned to water as thunderous applause swelled around her. Backstage, her phone buzzed with a single message. "Congratulations, Ms. Jackson. Welcome to Juilliard." She sank onto a worn velvet bench, tears spilling unbidden down her cheeks. Next came her mother's jubilant call, voices trembling, laughter spilling into tears. In that incandescent moment, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, and every defiant promise to prove her worth crystallized into pure joy. Aaliyah Jackson, once a little girl dreaming of stages, had aced the Juilliard audition, and the musical world's most hallowed doors swung wide in her honor. Aaliyah's days at Juilliard settled into a rigorous rhythm. Dawn break practice sessions in the cavernous practice halls, midday theory seminars, and evenings spent poring over orchestral scores. Yet, it was the sanctum of her private rehearsal room, room B14, that became both her refuge and her crucible. Behind its soundproof door, she coaxed nuance from every phrase of Rachmaninoff's vocalese, drawing from the depths of memory. Her grandmother humming lullabies in Bed-Stuy, the hush of Sunday church choirs, the thunder of Harlem's streets. One night, long after the last student had trudged home, Aaliyah adjusted the music stand and positioned the microphone at the room's far corner, an illicit setup she'd installed to record herself for technical review. She began with slow, deliberate scales, her bow arm tracing invisible arcs of light. In the next bar passage, she muttered to herself, "Don't drag the harmonics. Find the center of the string." With each admonition, her fingertips trembled from fatigue, and her voice cracked on the final word, intonation. Unbeknownst to her, critics Joseph Wickham and Elaine Rowan, white arbiters of New York's classical tastemakers, had slipped into the hall via a propped-open utility door. They watched from the shadows, their high-gain recorder capturing every mishap and personal aside. As Aaliyah tackled the fiendishly difficult double stops of the vocalized finale, she paused, bow hovering, and sighed, "Why do I feel like I'm pretending here? I don't belong." The confession, soft but unmistakable in the dead air, made her wince. Yet it was honest, born of the relentless pressure she imposed upon herself. Wickham and Rowan exchanged smug glances, their pens scratching notes. Aaliyah's internalized insecurity, unpolished edge, lack of classical reserve. Rowan whispered, "This will tear her brand apart." They retreated into the hallway, pockets lined with the raw audio that would later be spun into scandal. Alone again, Aaliyah replayed her last run-through on the room's playback system. She winced at the ragged edges of her self-critique, but also felt a fierce pride. No one had heard that raw truth before. The vulnerability was painful, yet integral to her artistry. She packed away her violin, muscles aching, and pressed her palms together in silent affirmation. Outside, the bitter wind rattled the practice room window. Inside, Aaliyah Jackson vowed that no secret recording could ever diminish the depth of her musical truth. 2 weeks before her Carnegie Hall debut, Aaliyah Jackson was deep in the final stages of preparation, polishing her concerto's cadenzas, refining her phrasing with her Juilliard coach, and mentally rehearsing the grand sweep of the hall's resonant acoustics when her world cracked open. It began with a flurry of push notifications on her phone. Audio leak. Aaliyah Jackson's private rehearsals exposed. Exclusive, Juilliard prodigy's agonizing doubts, captured on tape. And worst of all, drama queen or genius. Listen for yourself. At first, she thought it was a cruel prank, but as she scrolled, her breath caught. Embedded audio clips of her most vulnerable moments. Her whispered laments about feeling invisible during masterclasses. Her frustrated muttering, "Why can't I nail this shift?" And most painfully, her tear-soft confession, "Sometimes I want to quit. I don't belong here." The recordings dripped with intimacy, the hiss of the mic and the echo of the practice room stripping away every ounce of her public poise. Within hours, blogs and forums exploded. White critics Joseph Wickham and Elaine Rowan, longtime gatekeepers of New York's classical scene, had spun the clips into sensational headlines. On one prominent site, a post titled "Prodigy's Private Meltdown, Is She Juilliard Material?" amassed thousands of comments, many dismissive or cruel. "She's too emotional for the classics. This isn't Broadway. Get back to Harlem. Who lets a student record their whining?" Even mainstream outlets ran sanitized excerpts. Aaliyah's lack of reserve and unpolished edge became code for unfeminine and undeserving. Sponsors pulled ads from her debut programs, citing brand risk. Concert promoters quietly removed her name from upcoming chamber music series, blaming scheduling conflicts. Invitations to pre-concert masterclasses vanished overnight. Backstage at Juilliard, the atmosphere turned frosty. Peers whispered as she passed. Some offered awkward sympathy. Others avoided her gaze. Faculty members offered polite reassurance. "Focused on your technique, Aaliyah," but none publicly condemned the breach of privacy. She found herself isolated in the practice rooms, the walls seeming to close in with every cruel whisper she imagined hearing beyond the door. That evening, Aaliyah retreated to her dorm. She cradled her violin case like a shield, tears staining its worn edges. Her phone vibrated relentlessly, alerts of new hate tweets, private DMs laced with slurs and mockery. She felt the weight of every note she'd ever played, every sacrifice she'd made. Hours hunched under fluorescent lights, calluses on her fingertips, the ache in her shoulders from constant practice. And now, all of it was fodder for a spectacle. Yet even as despair threatened to drown her, a spark of defiance glowed. She remembered her mother's words after every setback. "Your music is your truth, baby. Don't let them steal it." With trembling hands, She clicked on her recital program draft, reopened her score for the Bruch Concerto, and set rehearsal full unedited run as a private recording session the next morning. If her private moments could be stolen, then she would reclaim them on her own terms, turning vulnerability back into strength. But first, she face-planted on her bed and allowed herself one long cry, mourning the innocence lost, the betrayal endured, and the fight that lay ahead. The leak had nearly cost her debut and threatened to shatter her confidence. Now, with the world watching, Aaliyah Jackson would have to decide: retreat into silence or return to the stage louder than ever. When Aaliyah arrived at Juilliard's practice tower the morning after the leak, the buzz of conversation stopped dead as she stepped off the elevator. Peers who once nodded greeting now averted their eyes. The pianist at the Grand Steinway pretended not to recognize her. Even the practice room scheduler hesitated before handing over the key, muttering apologies about unforeseen scheduling conflicts. Invitations to master classes and chamber music readings, the lifeblood of her training, mysteriously vanished from her inbox. Word spread quickly that a major sponsor had withdrawn funding for her Carnegie Hall recital, citing unresolved image concerns. Aaliyah watched helplessly as her debut fee was reassigned to another student. The Juilliard administration issued a bland statement, regretting the breach of privacy, but publicly urged restraint among faculty and students, an unspoken directive to distance themselves. Flyers advertising her concert were quietly removed from bulletin boards, and her name was omitted from official recital roundups in the student newspaper. Back in her dorm room, the relentless tide of social media barbs assaulted her phone. Messages ranged from pitying "good luck next time" emojis to venomous demands that she return to Harlem. A few loyal friends sent private notes of encouragement, but they, too, seemed afraid to stand too firmly by her. In the silence of her practice room that evening, Aaliyah lifted her violin, fingers finding the familiar strings, and then slowly set it back in its case. Her sanctuary had become a cage, the music that once gave her courage now echoing hollowly in empty halls. That night, Aaliyah lay awake, the leak's jagged edges cutting into every dream. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard the critics' whispers all over again. Unprofessional, too raw, a liability to the art form. She clutched her mother's old silk scarf, the one she wore for good luck, and made a silent vow. She would not let this betrayal define her. But as the hours ticked toward her darkest fears, she realized she faced a choice as momentous as any concerto's climactic cadenza: withdraw into exile, or summon every ounce of strength to reclaim her music and her name. The night before her scheduled Carnegie Hall debut, Aaliyah Jackson sat alone in practice room B14, the walls still echoing with the reverberations of her leaked rehearsal. Her shoulders ached from cradling the violin for hours. Her spirit, however, was broken. She stared at her reflection in the acoustic panel, tear-streaked cheeks, bow in hand, and wondered if she still belonged in this world of high stakes and harsher judgments. A soft knock startled her. The door cracked open to reveal Maestro Marcus Feldman, a Juilliard alumnus whose own virtuoso career had once been derailed by a false scandal. He stood framed in the dim hallway light, carrying a tattered leather satchel. "Mind if I come in?" he asked quietly. His presence alone, calm, resolute, felt like a lifeline. Inside, he unpacked his satchel, a compact 4K camera, a portable tripod, and a wireless lapel mic. "We're going to reclaim your narrative," he said, setting up equipment with practiced efficiency. Aaliyah watched, curiosity stirring through her exhaustion. "You're not alone in this," he promised. "Let's show them who you really are." Over the next 2 hours, Maestro Feldman coached her through a full run-through of Bruch's Violin Concerto. Every phrase was captured in crisp, uncompressed footage. The bold opening motif, the tender second movement melody, the exhilarating finale. Between takes, he offered hushed notes of encouragement. Lean into the second theme's rubato. Feel its sorrow and joy as one. And let your vibrato speak your story. Aaliyah summoned her deepest emotions, transforming technical perfection into raw, compelling artistry. When the final chord faded, Marcus switched off the camera's red tally light. "We'll edit this into a seamless performance video," he said. "Tomorrow morning, we'll post it on Juilliard's official channel and your social media. Alongside, you'll record a candid interview, address the leak, own your journey." Aaliyah's heart pounded at the idea of speaking publicly, but Marcus assured her, "Vulnerability is your strength. Audiences will rally behind authenticity, not facades." He introduced her to Nina Patel, a young white digital media strategist he'd brought in for crisis management. Nina explained the rollout: a 48-hour embargo, targeted emails to major classical blogs, simultaneous posts on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and a curated Q&A session scheduled 5 hours after the video's debut. Late into the night, they crafted Aaliyah's message. "My music reflects my life, its triumphs, its doubts, its humanity. The leaked recordings revealed my vulnerability. But vulnerability is not a flaw. It's the root of every soulful phrase we play." As dawn neared, the trio reviewed their plan one last time. Aaliyah saved the final edit to Nina's encrypted drive and drafted the accompanying post. Exhausted yet exhilarated, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. Tomorrow, she would break the silence and seize control of her own story. And with that resolve, she tucked her violin into its case, ready to step back into the light. At dawn's first light, Juilliard's campus stirred with renewed energy. Aaliyah Jackson arrived at practice room B14, her phone gripped in one hand, violin case in the other. Overnight, Maestro Marcus Feldman's rehearsal video and Aaliyah's candid message had gone live on Juilliard's official channels. Now she braced herself for the world's verdict. She paused at the practice room door and took a deep breath. Inside, Nina Patel's white-gloved laptop waited on the music stand, notifications already blinking furiously. Aaliyah opened the comments feed. The first replies were cautious, but quickly shifted from skepticism to admiration. A post from the New York Times classical blog led, "Prodigy's vulnerability becomes her power. Aaliyah Jackson's unfiltered brilliance." Beneath it, white critics who had panned the leak now tweeted praise. "Her passion is electrifying, raw, and real. Authenticity is the future of classical music. Thank you, Aaliyah, for showing us the heart behind the technique." Nina grinned and handed Aaliyah a playlist of glowing press quotes. "You've shifted the narrative," she said. "Your honesty sparked a movement. Real artists vulnerable. Artists is trending." Indeed, the hashtag flooded feeds as musicians worldwide shared stories of their own struggles. Aaliyah lifted her violin, heart fluttering as she tested a few open strings. She felt buoyed by the groundswell of support. Today's rehearsal would be different. Not a prelude to crisis, but a celebration of resurrection. She practiced the opening bars of Bruch's concerto with newfound conviction, bow strokes ringing clear and full-bodied. By mid-morning, campus newsstands featured full-page spreads on the story, and Juilliard's dean issued an open letter condemning the privacy breach while endorsing Aaliyah's courageous response. Faculty members stopped her in passing, some offering sheepish apologies, others heartfelt congratulations. Even students who'd shunned her now nodded with respect. That evening, the press office delivered word from Carnegie Hall's artistic director. The original sponsor had been reinstated, and Aaliyah's debut would proceed as planned. Furthermore, they'd extended her performance slot and arranged for a post-concert interview on NPR's From the Top. Aaliyah felt tears prick her eyes as she relayed the news to her mother over the phone, voice trembling with relief and pride. On the night of the debut, the Grand Hall shimmered under golden chandeliers. The marquee glowed, "Aaliyah Jackson in Bruch's Violin Concerto." Backstage, Aaliyah's violin sat on a velvet cushion beside the stage door. She paused for a moment, recalling the leaked recordings that nearly destroyed her. Now nothing more than fuel for her comeback. As the orchestra struck the opening chord, Aaliyah stepped forward into the spotlight. With each shimmering note and soaring lyricism, she poured every ounce of her reclaimed narrative into the music. When the final cadence held firm and the hall erupted in thunderous applause, She closed her eyes and let the ovation wash over her. In that triumphant moment, the critics' cruelty was eclipsed by a chorus of celebration. Aaliyah Jackson had transformed vulnerability into victory, reclaiming her art and securing her place on the world's grandest stages. The marquee on West 57th Street glowed like a promise. Aaliyah Jackson and Bruch's Violin Concerto. Inside Carnegie Hall's hallowed walls, the audience murmured with anticipation. Seasoned concert-goers, Juilliard faculty, white critics turned supporters, and a scattering of Harlem neighbors who'd traveled uptown to witness her vindication. Backstage, Aaliyah stood in the wings, violin tucked under her chin, bow poised. Beneath her sleek black gown, her heart fluttered like the opening motif of her beloved concerto. As the house lights dimmed, the conductor, a renowned white maestro, nodded to the orchestra, and the first rich chords rolled across the stage. Aaliyah stepped into the golden beam of the spotlight, the polished wood of the stage floor warm beneath her feet. She inhaled deeply, centering herself on the memory of Maestro Feldman's encouragement and the fierce solidarity of every voice raised in number real artists, vulnerable artists. Then, with the flick of her wrist, she launched into the concerto's opening theme. Her bow sang with crystalline clarity through the sweeping melodies. Each phrase brimmed with newfound depth. The gentle sighs of the second movement were tinted with the memory of late-night tears and whispered doubts. The triumphant finale crackled with electric confidence, born of every trial she had weathered. The orchestra responded in kind, weaving around her solo lines with supple support, and the hall's famed acoustics carried her sound from the chandelier-studded ceiling to the farthest balcony. Midway through the concerto, the audience leaned forward, rapt. Under her nimble fingers, the violin's voice became a human narrative. Vulnerability transformed into radiant strength. White critics, seated in the center tier, exchanged looks of awe. Some dabbed at tears, others scribbled hurried notes for glowing reviews. Aaliyah's jaw set with quiet determination as she navigated the concerto's fiendish cadenza. Each staccato leap and rapid arpeggio landed with precision and passionate urgency. When the final resonant note hung in the air, the silence stretched for an eternal heartbeat, then shattered into thunderous applause. The audience sprang to its feet in a standing ovation, whistles and bravos echoing off the gilded boxes. Aaliyah let her bow fall, tears glinting under the stage lights, and offered a deep, graceful bow to the conductor, the orchestra, and the multitude of faces before her. Backstage, the congratulatory rush was overwhelming. Sponsors who had once withdrawn their support now queued to embrace her. The Carnegie Hall artistic director clasped her hands and beamed. White critics approached with praises like transformative and unforgettable, eager to retract every previous slight. Aaliyah's mother found her among the throng, tears of pride shining in her eyes as she whispered, "You did it, baby." Later that night, in Juilliard's glittering debutante after-party, Aaliyah raised a glass alongside Maestro Feldman, Nina Patel, and her closest friends. Champagne flutes tinkled in a toast to vulnerability courageously reclaimed, and to music that carries us beyond adversity. As laughter and music swelled around her, Aaliyah Jackson realized that her triumph was more than a single performance. It was every note she had ever played, every whispered doubt she had overcome, and every heart she had moved along the way. In the golden glow of Carnegie Hall, she had not only reclaimed her debut, she had claimed her destiny.